Very good morning to everyone. Executive teams, directors, our guests, and all protocol observed, good morning to you. Students, a very good morning to you. I hope you are well. Give a little bit of smile. It's a good day. Some smiling will do. Okay, I'm not gonna waste any time. We are late already. My name is Crystal Mukwena. I am going to be your program director. As I've said, I won't even waste time. We just have to start. I will call upon Mr. Andisa Matelemusa to come and give an opening and welcome address. Can we please put our hands together for him?
Thank you very much, Program Director. Amanda. I think I'm the only employee in this university who is allowed to do Amanda. Thank you very much. Program Director, staff, members of the university who are present here today, students from different faculties, student leadership led by the President, John Daka, and all distinguished guests who are present here today. I want to take this opportunity and welcome all of you to this historic program. And this program, it makes us to deviate from the core business of the university, which is teaching and learning. But it is very much important that we do that because it's also important that we commemorate and celebrate historic dates which are there in the calendar of the Republic of South Africa. Of one of the days, this one, which is the Freedom Day. Freedom Day is also important because it makes us to be who we are today. So it is therefore very important because this year we are going to participate in the national elections. So all of us must know the importance of the national elections and the importance of us going to participate in those elections. So we have brought the best of the best in the industry. And I can tell you that it was not easy to secure the SC who is going to deliver the lecture today. We have started this conversation last year, and we failed last year. He said we'll see you next year. meaning 2024. So now in 2024, when we try to get him, you'll remember that this event was shifted. It was supposed to take place day before yesterday. Then he said, no, let's shift the date. Then I said, nah, there's a problem here. So we agreed on shifting the dates. Yesterday, his flight to Polokwane was in the morning at around 9. So at 10, I texted Advocate Nero Mondo, who works together with him. So that text goes, I realized that these comrades are not in the flight. I said, hey, mister, what's happening? He did not respond for more than 2 hours. Then he came back to say, hey, there is a problem. I said, hey, we are going to be rendered incompetent by the university. We can't postpone one event for more than 2 days. If ever there are stories, then we'll just have to cancel. But be that as it may, we would also like to appreciate the effort which have been played by Advocate Naromondo, who is an alumni of this university, as a graduated. His qualifications here in this university played a very critical role to make sure that we get SC here. I think I saw him. If you can just raise your hand, Advocate Naromondo. Yeah, he is that side. Let's give him a round of applause. So, comrades, let's participate and let's give full attention to the lecture which is going to be delivered, because we cannot give you assurity it's going to happen again in the next coming 10 years. So let's participate and make sure that we form part of this historic event. Without any further ado, Program Director, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Matelemusa. I think it happened so well. This is going to be one of the memorable events. It happened so well that it didn't come last year. This year, there are so many things to think about. This Freedom Day is even more special. I mean, 30 years into democracy, there's so much to think about. So I think it was really a good thing that it didn't come, and we are happy to really have him today. I was even telling my student that I was like, you know, you have to be there. I mean, if you are a law student, you have to be there. We are talking about the advocate, you know. So we are really glad, Advocate. We are honored. Thank you so much. We're now going to have a message of support by Mr. John Daga. Let's put our hands for him as he comes forward. Our president is not here, but we hope he's gonna come. But we won't be waiting for him. You know, he's a comrade. Comrades are organizing things. Let's, in the meantime, let's call on our Dr. Manto Madiba to come and introduce our guest speaker. Can you please put our hands together for him?
Good morning. Sanbonan. Molweni. A warm and graceful welcome to everybody here today, our executive deans, our directors to our law school, as well as our guest of honor. When I started thinking about today, I thought about how I was born in exile to exile parents. And I have a vivid image of the day my parents voted for the first time. And it wasn't a birthday. I'm wondering, what are we celebrating? Why are my parents so happy? I don't remember my father's direct response. He said something about how he could vote. I was still very young, I was 8-year-old. I was like, oh, okay. And then he said this: because of this day, we don't have to go back into exile. And that stays with me until today. So as we listen to our guest, I want us to celebrate and remember the sacrifices of the people that came before us. They ensured that we could enjoy the freedoms that we have today. Many freedoms that some people in the world do not have. And that's why it's so crucial, and it's so, we're very lucky to have the SC here today. Not only does he promote freedoms in our country, but even in places like Palestine, they don't have the freedoms that we have today. So let me tell you a little bit about our guest. So, Advocate Tembeka Nicholas Ngcukaitobi SC was born December 1976 in South Africa, lawyer and legal scholar. An advocate of the Johannesburg Bar since August 2010, he gained silk status in February 2010. Talking about silk, guys. I'm looking at my law students in the room. What is silk? Can you tell me what silk is? It's a very important status. He's currently a member of the Judicial Service Commission and a part-time member of the Competition Commission's Competition Tribunal. Advocate Ngcukaitobi began his legal career, his legal career at the Legal Aid Clinic in Mthatha and then at the Legal Resource Center in Grahamstown. He received offers to clerk at the Constitutional Court, offers fourth-year students. He received from different justices. He received one from Arthur Chackelson. He received one from Sandile Ngcobo and Cato Reagan. He chose to clerk for Chackelson, and you've seen Chackelson in our court decisions. After that, he worked at Bowman Gifflin between 2001 and 2010. In August 2010, the advocate was admitted to the Johannesburg Bar as an advocate of the High Court of South Africa. He spent 3 years as a director of the Constitutional Litigation Unit at the Legal Resource Center, during which time he worked with George Bizos as counsel for the families of the victims of the Marikana massacre. Over the next decade, he appeared in front of the Constitutional Court and frequently in front of the Competition Appeals Court, the High Court, and the Supreme Court of Appeal. Early in his career, he frequently served as a junior counsel under Advocate Dalimpofu SC, including in the Gareth Cliff campaign to be reinstated as a judge on idols in 2015, in the MDC Alliance campaign to overturn the results of the 2018 Zimbabwean elections. The Sunday Times nicknamed him the Robin to Advocate Dalimpofu's SC Batman. He's currently attached to the Duma Nokwe Group at the Johannesburg Bar. He's currently serving under the following entities: the member of the Judicial Service Commission, member of the Duma Nokwe Group of Advocates, acting judge of the Land Claims Court, former president of the Convocation of Walter Sisulu University, and he is the current chairperson of the Walter Sisulu University Council. I think that's the best way to stop. Ladies and gentlemen, we are so privileged to have SC here. Please, let's give him the warm Venda welcome.
Molweni, Nthambeleni, sanibonani, good morning, goeiemorgen. So I want to thank you for welcoming me to this university. People think that it's my first time to come to Univen, but I want to tell you that in my days as a student, I was also an activist. I was a member of SASCO. SASCO still alive? Okay. No, you see, I ask seriously because whenever I go, like at WUSU right now, the EFF Student Command won the elections. So I don't know at Univen who's in the SRC. EFF Student Command? Yeah, it looks like everywhere EFF is just winning everything. Anyway, I came to Univen. I think the Vice-Chancellor at the time was Professor Nkondo. Do you know him? Yeah, so you see, I've been around the block. Those were, I can't even remember when that was, but approximately 20 years ago, that I first came to Univen for a SASCO event. And since then, I've regularly come. I think the last time was in 2021. The university hosted the Black Lawyers Association. I came to give a speech here. So it's a university I'm familiar with, and I'm very pleased to be here. There is some historical association between Univen and my university. I was a student at the University of Transkei. Both of these were Bantustan universities. I think Univen was established in 1981 or 82. You wouldn't know, huh? All right, okay. Either 81 or 82. But it was a branch of Teflop University when it was started, and it only gained a full university status, I think, much later. So the same position with UNITRA. It started in 1978 as a branch of the University of Fort Hare. And it was at the time when the apartheid system was consolidating in the creation of Bantustans. And here we are in the former homeland of Venda, for quote-unquote Venda speakers. And I come from the former homeland of Transkei, presumably for Xhosa speakers. But both universities have, since their establishment, I think, transcended their origins, and sort of tried to remake themselves, as universities of the new South Africa, in which they provide tertiary education for black students who come from working class backgrounds and provide them the tools and the instruments to live in the new South Africa, work in the new South Africa, and achieve their economic and social aspirations. And in that sense, these are inspirational institutions because they have turned their history into a new future. And so whenever I get invited to speak at Fort Hare, at UNIZUL, at Univen, I actually truly get inspired because I know for a fact that if it had not been for a university similar to yours, I simply would never have had tertiary education. It would have been impossible to get a law degree. Couldn't have got the LLB degree that I have. I think many of you are in that position that, except for Univen, you would otherwise be unable to obtain university education. So that's why you should be proud that you are here, but you should also guard jealously that the institution should continue after you have left, and it should continue providing the same opportunity to students coming after you that it did to me. I hear Rolivuo Nelomondo was also here. He is now at the bar. I don't know what he's doing there, but he's there. So, which means you have also produced, advocates, and there are many advocates at the Johannesburg bar that have come from this university, and so many other professionals across that have come from this university. So, this opportunity, therefore, is a moment I cherish that I've been invited to give the Freedom Day lecture. I've also been given a blank check. I don't know if you know a blank check. When they give you just a check, you can fill in the amount as you wish. So I've been given a blank check in terms of what to talk about. And the only guidance I was given is that it should be about freedom, right? In the context of the Freedom Day. So I thought perhaps I should ask before we start, because I've got a particular lecture and particular notes that I want to talk about, but that's me. I don't know what you want to listen to, but unfortunately you have to listen to what I've prepared, even if that's not what you planned this morning. But what is freedom? Who wants to tell us from their perspective how they understand what freedom is? Surely you've thought about freedom. Okay, let's see. Who wants to raise their hand and tell us how they interpret freedom? Okay, I'll just point people. And if I've pointed you, then, all right, so, okay, let's start here. Anyone from this side, from this front row, who wants to, anything, any idea about what they think freedom means and why Freedom Day is important? Yes. It's the state of being free, okay, that's fine. State of being free, okay. Let's get another, let's get maybe 3 ideas. That's the first idea, state of being free. Okay, there's another one. Okay, doing something without your rights being violated. Okay, so we're getting a very broad conception. So state of being free, no violation of rights. Okay, we're getting there. Okay, has anyone else, okay, there's a third one. Having the right to choose, yes, freedom to choose. Freedom to choose, all right. All of those 3 answers are good. They are actually correct. But one element of freedom that we haven't spoken about is the absence of compulsion, absence of force. It's absence of compulsion, absence of force, right? The reason why this is crucial to always remember when we're talking about freedom is that in South Africa, freedom came as a result of a government that had controlled this country from 1652, when the Dutch arrived in the Cape, the moment they got off the boat. And what they did, they compelled people to behave in a particular way. They forced people to act in a particular way. And so freedom was then a negation. It was a negation of white colonial rule. It was when African people were saying, we can no longer continue being compelled against our will to act in particular ways. What we want is the freedom to choose that you mentioned. We want the state of being free. We want the state of having rights. All of those collectively reduce into one concept, which is self-determination. It's the idea that we can determine ourselves. So when we are children, we don't really have self-determination because our parents are telling us everything, right? When we are students, in a sense we are free, but you have to follow the rules because, if the assignment is due today, it must be submitted today. You don't have freedom to submit it whenever you want, right? And you don't have freedom to be told that you've passed a course, even though you have failed it. So freedom always comes with obligations. It always comes with responsibilities. It also comes with following the rules. So there is no thing as absolute freedom. Why is that so? It is because every time we exercise freedom, we do it in the community of other people. So we have rights, they have rights too. The question is balancing those. So we are always talking about freedom that is limited by its very design. So in order for freedom to make sense, it has to have limits and limitations. Now, because I'm a lawyer, I have to locate the discussion about freedom in the Constitution, right? I have to debate it in the Constitution. And that's what I really want to talk about today. I want to talk about the idea of constitutionalism, about how that idea has transformed our society from being an oppressive apartheid society to being a free democracy, and what are the limits to the freedom that we currently have. So, and that's why the paper is therefore entitled Critiques about Constitutionalism. Okay, these are big words, but I'm hopefully going to unpack them so that we are all of the same page. So the most profound change, the most important change that took place in the last 30 years, right? The most important change was a change to move from a system of oppression, of white rule under parliamentary sovereignty, into a system of constitutionalism, right? So just keep those in mind, that when the whites were still running this country, okay, many of us could have been born here and they never saw any whites. What they saw was Mpepu running the show here. Like, they're wondering, where are these whites? But he himself was a product of a white system. So it was, in that meta sense, still a white administration. So the most important change, the most profound change, was that we moved from a system of parliamentary sovereignty to a system of constitutionalism. So what does that mean, right? What does this mean? What it means is that in the past, prior to 1994, when Parliament spoke, its word was final, right? No one could challenge what Parliament had decided. But because Parliament was comprised exclusively of white men, it meant that the rules in the country were rules determined by white men in the service of white supremacy and in the service of apartheid. And so the change that then is brought about in 1994, spearheaded primarily by Nelson Mandela and the ANC, is to replace parliamentary sovereignty with constitutionalism. So what does constitutionalism mean? There are 5 elements of constitutionalism that we have to just remember. The first is majority rule, right? When you elect your SRC, you also know, even if you elect a class representative, but you know that the person who will win is the person that will get more than 50 plus 1 votes, and that's the person who wins. And the same thing with the administration of the country. The country is run on majority rule, which is a majority of those people who show up, not the majority of the South Africans, but the majority of those people who go and vote. They will constitute the government. So if you want to constitute the new government, you must go and vote on the 29th of May. If you don't vote, then you have no right to complain. Well, if you can vote, let's start there. Who is more than 18 here who can vote? Okay. Looks like the majority are more than 18. Okay. Anyway, if you're younger than 18, you can't vote. It's only if you're older than 18 that you can vote. All right. Looks like, I don't know if anyone is younger than 18 in this room. So, first principle is democratic rule, majority rule. The second principle is that constitutionalism is underpinned by law. That's very, very important. It's underpinned by law. So most decisions that are made are decisions based on what the law says, right? Which is different from decisions based on what the politicians say. Under apartheid, it was primarily whatever the National Party politicians decided. And under constitutionalism, it's a system of law that regulates. But it's not any legal system, and this is the third point. It also has a Bill of Rights. Right? We have a list of Bill of Rights from Section 1 up to Section 37 of the Constitution. They list all of the rights we are entitled to. So one of them is the freedom to choose that you were talking about. But there are many others: freedom of speech or freedom of expression, right to life, right to human dignity, etc. They're all listed there. And so we did not have the Bill of Rights under apartheid. We now have it. The fourth is that the courts or the judiciary interprets the laws. It's very crucial that the courts interpret the laws. The laws are not interpreted by Parliament. They are interpreted by the courts. And the final one is that the decision of the judges is final on what the law means. Now, this has generated a lot of controversy, and I want to talk to you about it today so that when you encounter these theoretical topics outside, you are sufficiently empowered to engage on them. So what the judges decide is final. So often, something will go to the Constitutional Court, and the Constitutional Court will say, this is the law on topic X, and you will hear there will be a lot of protests. You know, why do the judges say this? Who is in fact in control of the country? Is it us, the people, or the judges? So those are the 5 elements of constitutionalism, and that is how they differ from the previous system of apartheid rule. And why have people then been critical about the system? The first, and there are 3 critiques that I want to explore today. The first is a critique of representation. What do I mean by this? People are saying, those who are in critique of the constitutional system that we have, they're saying that we are not represented. Right? They feel that we are not represented. They feel that there is a tiny minority that makes the decision on our behalf. See, so crisis of representation. And that is why they have now started to argue that maybe if we returned to parliamentary sovereignty, we will be better represented, because Parliament is a platform of the people. That is where the voice of the people is heard. So they say, let's go back to parliamentary supremacy or parliamentary sovereignty. But we've already been there. But so the problem is a complaint about representation. The second is that they say the party system is corrupt, you see. So the ANC, which is the majority party, is a corrupt party. I'm not saying it is, but I'm saying that's the critique. Don't say, well, I don't know, is it corrupt or not? I don't know. Let's just look at the report by Judge Zondo and make up your mind. So the second critique is that the party system is a corrupt system, and it produces corrupt outcomes. And so it always excludes from its framing the voices of the people. What it does do is that it looks after the political elites. So that's criticism about representation. And this is why currently there has been a change of the law in order to address the problem of representation. And the law has been changed to allow independents alongside political parties to have a voice and a say in Parliament. So for the first time, when you get a ballot paper this year, for the first time since 1994, you will not just vote for the party, you will also vote for an independent candidate. And the way they have split it is 50-50. There are 400 seats in Parliament. 200 of those will be for independents, and the other 200 will be for political parties. But if the independents don't meet the threshold, there will be compensatory seats that go back to the proportional representation system. Now, this is an attempt to address the crisis of representation, where people feel that the political party system does not accurately reflect their needs. It's a corrupt system, and it has produced corrupt outcomes. But I fear that even this attempt at independence will probably not solve the crisis of representation. It will not solve the crisis of representation. How many of us here know of one independent that is running for elections? Who can name one independent? Who? Okay. You see? Sorry, just Anel Mda. Oh yes, Anel Mda is popular, I see. All right, good. At least one person is known. Are you going to vote for him? Oh, okay, it's your secret. All right, at least one person knows. And then give me another name. Another name of an independent candidate that you know who's running for elections. All right, so all of us here know only one, Anel Mda. But let me ask a different question then. Give me five leaders of political parties that you know that are running. Exactly. Exactly the point. You see, all of us know the leaders of the political parties. We don't know of the independents. So what it means is that the experiment of introducing independence is actually a failure from the beginning. The experiment is a failure from the beginning. And the reason why it is a failure from the beginning, it is because it is not a genuine attempt at breaking the stranglehold of the political party system over the electoral process. And the reason why it did not become a genuine attempt at breaking the control of political parties over the electoral system was that it was the political parties themselves, right, who were sitting in parliament and designing the system. And they were designing a system in their interests, right, not a system in our interests. And so, which means that what we actually need is still a deeper system of representation, right, which is not currently reflected in law. There are many ways of achieving a deeper representative system, one of which has been tried everywhere in England, is a constituency model, a full constituency model, full constituencies where people are not representing their jackets, because these independents also always feel like someone is just representing his jacket or her jacket. But what we need is a full constituency model on that 50% of the ballot, full constituencies where people represent specific designed constituencies. And they can be recalled by those constituencies. If you think about it now, you say Anele Mda is a good example. Who's going to recall her if we are no longer satisfied about her performance? Right? No one. But if you voted for the EFF or you voted for the ANC, you know the leader of the EFF, you know the leader of the ANC, you know the leader of the IFP, you know the leader of BOSA, you know the leader of Rise Mzansi. All of the political parties are known. But you also know that those parties have internal checks and balances. If you no longer like the representative, you can recall them. Well, if you must first join the party, you can't just recall them from the lecture hall at the university. You must go to the party, go to the branch, and then recall them. But there is at least a system of internal checks and balances for accountability. And that system does not currently exist for these independents. So the current model that they have introduced of independence is not going to solve the problem they purported to solve, which is the crisis of legitimacy. Right? And then we go to the first point that I mentioned here, which is this crisis of parliamentary sovereignty, this idea that we must return to parliamentary sovereignty. Now, I was invited, I think last year, by the ANC KwaZulu-Natal province. The topic I was invited to speak about was whether or not South Africa should return to parliamentary sovereignty. Now, the reason I mentioned this is that it became clear to me that even within the ANC, which is the party that gave birth to constitutionalism, there is beginning to be a rethink about whether or not parliamentary sovereignty, which was an apartheid system, which they fought for years against, whether or not we should be returning to that system in order to plug the gap between the governors and the governed, right? And I made the point there that these calls for a return to parliamentary sovereignty have forgotten about history. They've forgotten that this is the system we come from. And they've forgotten why we did not like the system in the first place. But they also distort the nature of parliamentary sovereignty, right? Because we must remember the history of parliamentary system, how it emerged. So if you go back, I don't know if there are students here of philosophy or of history or of political science. Okay, political science? Anyone who's studying political science? Okay, anyone who's studying history? Anyone studying philosophy? All right, law, okay. No, don't worry. So if you actually look at how did we get to a parliamentary system historically, and you'll find this in philosophy books, in political science books, and in some law books. In Athens, in Greece, which is where democracy, as we know it today, starts from, what they really wanted when they introduced democracy was direct democracy. Like we are all sitting here, we choose who the president of the country is going to be. So maybe you can choose me, or you can choose Nelwamondo and say he's going to be the president. You know? But one of us becomes the president. It's direct. We don't have to go via the party, but it's direct. You choose. And that is what the Athenian version of democracy was. But that democratic system was so entrenched among the people that the elites, the educated ones, started rebelling against direct democracy, right? And the outcome of that rebellion by the elites against direct democracy was what today we know as parliamentary system. It is a form of republicanism, right? South Africa is a republic. So it's a form of republicanism. And what you do with it, you put a structure between the people and the government, and that structure is parliament. So even in a parliamentary system, you still do not have representation. It's indirect representation, because what you hope is that the people that are elected will represent your interests. So even if you went fully into a parliamentary system, the parliamentary system still does not give you the outcome that you want, which is representation. So you are still left with a crisis of representation. So which means that the parliamentary system is itself in need of reform, right? In order to create the level of accountability between the people that are in parliament and the people that are government. And I can ask you the question, give me 5 names of ANC parliamentarians, not EFF parliamentarians. Everyone's going to know the EFF parliamentarians. 5 names of ANC parliamentarians, not members of cabinet, but the MPs, just 5 names. Okay, let me ask a different question. Let me not ask about the speaker, because the speaker has been in the news. Let me ask about the chief whip. Who is the chief whip of the ANC? Yes, exactly my point, right? Ask you who's the chief whip of the EFF. Everyone knows it's Floyd Shivambu. That's fine. But the point is that even though we have parliament, we actually don't even know the members of parliament. We don't know who they are. And when was the last time a member of parliament came to Univen? And then they said, no, we've come here to listen to your concerns about higher education, a member of parliament. Right? So you may find that after 4 years of studying at Univen, you've never seen an MP. Right? They've never come to you. Now, a constituency model solves this problem, because every time the leader of that constituency has to return to parliament, they need to go and take a mandate from the constituency. And every time they have to come back and report to the constituency, and not a system that is ultimately captured by political elites. So that's the first critique about representation, and that is my suggestion about the future. The second critique to constitutionalism has been a critique of Africanization. And the argument here is that the system in South Africa lacks African values, African systems, and traditional norms and mores, right? And they say the system is too Eurocentric, right? And then they say the system does not give due recognition to traditional leaders. And it does not give traditional leaders control over land, right? And then they say, well, this is a system designed in Europe and then imposed on us as Africans. Now, it is true that the system limits the role of traditional leaders. Right? It limits the role of traditional leaders. Because if you think about it, every ward in this country, every ward, South Africa has 120 million hectares. That's the total land surface of the country, excluding the rivers and whatever, but 120 million hectares of land surface. Every bit of it has a municipality. We have what is called wall-to-wall municipalities. So if you think, well, if I have a wall-to-wall municipality, what is then the role of a traditional leader, right? What is the role of a chief? What is the role of a headman? All right, who knows they are headman or their chief or they are, just give me the name. Nelwa Mondo is not a chief, he's just a, who knows the name of their chief in the village where they come from? Just raise a hand, say, look, I know, I'm not going to ask what's the name, but I just want to know if we know our chiefs. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, okay, 8. All right, okay, good. This is very good. So we know the chiefs, right? And because the chiefs are in the villages where we are at, right? And the argument here is, well, what is their role? So if I want water, can I phone a chief? Or do I phone a municipal councillor? Right? And if the answer is, well, you phone a municipal councillor, then the question is, why then do I have a superfluous system of traditional leadership, which is not, in fact, going to help me on bread and butter? Right? When I want service delivery, the chief is not going to be there. And then the argument is, well, we need the chiefs because they are the repositories of customs and culture. So they are the people that remind us that we are African. And because they remind us that we are Africans, they are then the custodians. Custodians. You know, when I was a student, I would get into a hall and someone is talking, and then I would sit at the back, even though there are actual vacant seats in the front. I see that it's still the case even now. So anyway, so if people want to sit in the front here, there's a lot of seats. The hall is now filling up. You know, I think people were skeptical. Is this lecture going to happen? Now that it's happening, the texts are going around. No, come now, it's happening. So let's come back to this conflict of Africanization and constitutionalism, right? This is the supposed conflict. But when we actually examine the constitutional system, what we find is that the Constitution itself mentions customary law, traditional leadership, culture, at least 7 times. 7 times it's mentioned. And the intention was that the system of customary law, which had been denigrated for over 300 years, would then be rebuilt from the beginning. It will be rebuilt by us. It will be rebuilt by us. And in many respects, we, Africans, right, whenever we engage on this topic about customary law, the way we engage that topic, I sometimes feel is not actually genuine engagement with it. We don't really want to return to the world of our forefathers. We don't really want to return to that world. We have something else that we are trying to say by Africanization. We don't mean we want to wear the traditional attire. We don't mean that we want to eat masonja and stuff. We mean something else by Africanization. Probably we mean self-determination. What we mean is we want to decide for ourselves what our destiny should be. And this is the Africanization we have. So it's not a fossilized version, right, of what was the world in Africa before the whites arrived. It is rather, what is the world of the future that we want to build? So we are often always talking about living customary law. It's living customary law. It's the things we want for ourselves and the things we want for the future. And so in that sense, this supposed conflict is illusory. It is an illusory conflict because we are talking about the same thing. We are talking about democratization of thought, democratization of culture, and democratization of custom, right? And we ourselves do not agree with our chiefs and our traditional leaders when they say that chieftaincy should be reserved for men. We don't agree with that, right? But they themselves say that the idea of male primogeniture is customary. How many of you have heard that? No, remember the case of Namitwa? How many of you have heard that in order to be a chief, you must be a male? How many have heard that? Yes, exactly. So, how many agree with it? Okay, well, at least one agrees. All right, let's hear what your reasons are. This will be very interesting. Yeah, give us your reason. One reason why you believe chieftaincy cannot move from male to female. It must always move male, 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 until all of the males are dead. Yes. Yeah, I know. I think everyone wants to hear you. Yeah, so you must get the microphone.
Okay, like I was caught on the spot, so I won't like give like the most.
No. Anything will do. I'm just curious of your reasons.
I think like looking back, right? Men have always been the one to be the heads.
Yeah.
And now that we're talking about like going back, like Africanization thing of like going back to like giving chiefs a role at least. I think it's only fair that we still follow the traditions if we want to go back there. We shouldn't go back 1 foot in and one out.
Yeah. In other words, we must stop the hypocrisy. That's a good point, actually, that actually this debate about Africanization is itself a hypocritical debate. On the one side, we say we want to be African, but on the other side, we say there are certain things that are African which we don't really like. All right, but there was a lot of people who disagreed with the notion that chieftaincy should move from man to man to man to man, who say women should also have a chance to become chiefs. Let's get your reason. Oh, there's someone at the back, right at the back there. Yes, the lady there. She will tell us why this is all discriminatory, it's all amandla, women must to the front.
I can say that it is discriminatory because bear in mind that we live in a democratic society, and in our constitution, equality was not defined, that men or women should not be equal. So I think that women should be given the opportunity to hand over traditional matters, because women are not empowered in our society. They are always regarded as inferior. So it would give women the opportunity to also learn about the challenges that women face in the society. So hence I say it is important.
Yes, thank you. There's another hand here who wants to add to this. I think you are in the minority here. There's someone else here, the third row, this side, who wants to add another reason. So let's hear from a man. He wants to give up power.
Thank you.
Hey, Chief.
My belief is that tradition, I can see, it's an enemy of change.
Yeah.
In the sense that we can't stick onto something just because it's our tradition or our culture. It's like when as black people we go to celebrate the 24th of September and I want to dress like a Venda, you want to dress like a Tsonga. You are empowering what white people did to us, to separate us, to say black people, Tsongas this side, Vendas this side, and we can't go back to those practices.
Yeah.
So I believe when you come now to the issue of women not being allowed to be chief, let's agree that our cultures and our traditions were barbaric. That's the truth. Because women were treated as inferior, and most of the human rights were not were violated, they were infringed. If you go back to our mothers, some of them were forced into marriages. You go to how widows are treated. You go to most of our traditional practices themselves, they are barbaric. And as black people, if we look at Africa, for example, you find that some of the times the punishment, if you say no to go to the army, they cut off your hands, they do that. Do we want to go back to those practices?
Yeah.
Myself, I have a twin brother, and I was told that if I lived at the time, the previous times, because I had a twin brother and I was the one who was always sick, I was supposed to be killed. That's the tradition. Do we really want to go back to those traditions? That's the question. So we should just agree that tradition is an enemy of change. We have moved from those practices. Now we should focus on the future. Women and men, I believe in equality. We must treat men, women equally. Although I know that some of the times it's themselves women who don't want this, the equality that they preach. But I believe, let's treat them equal. They have rights as well. They are human beings. Our traditional practices were barbaric, and I speak of equality. Thank you.
Thank you. So, imagine. Now, Now imagine if we followed that custom of just chopping off one twin. Who would be sitting there now? But the point I'm trying to illustrate here is that we are still caught in this conflict between the demand for change and the demand for Africanization. And maybe the answer, right, maybe the answer is a combination of these three responses, which is we want Africanization, but Africanization is not static. It's constantly evolving. It's constantly changing. And it is also responding to the changes around it. And one of these changes is that it no longer makes sense that you have to exclude from leadership people on the grounds only of gender, and that leadership is perhaps something that has to do with ability and little to do with gender. But that debate continues to bedevil our trajectory towards constitutionalism. And at the heart of constitutionalism, the lady at the back put her finger on the problem. At the heart of constitutionalism is this idea of equality, right? It's this idea of equality. But the problem is that equality is not something that we inherit. It's not something that's given. But it is something that we aspire towards, something that is an ideal that we constantly fight for. So then we come back to chiefs and control over land. So we were debating now chiefs and primogeniture ascending to chieftaincy and leadership, and trying to explore what freedom means in that context. But there is another version of freedom, which is control over land. Many of us have heard, particularly from chiefs, that they have an inalienable right to be the custodians of land, right? I did a case 3 years ago in KZN on the land of Ingonyama Trust, and this debate was taking place there. But you have heard, I have no doubt, that chiefs argue that they are the custodians of the land. And the conflict here is a conflict between the communities and the chiefs, between the family and the chief. But it also arises in the context of women and their relationship to the land. Let me tell you what happened in that case. We know the history of Ingonyama Trust. It is a notorious history. I mean, notorious in the sense that it's ubiquitous, not notorious because it's bad. It's a notorious history in terms of which, towards the end of the days of apartheid, I think it was the 23rd of April, 1994, almost 30 years to the day, right? The Ingonyama Trust Act was signed into law. Probably the last act that F.W. de Klerk signed. Why? The history to it is very fascinating. A year before, in 1993, Mangosuthu Buthelezi, the leader of the Inkatha Freedom Party, left the negotiations, right? They had been negotiating there at CODESA. I think most of you have heard about CODESA. And the young people hate CODESA. They keep saying, where are the minutes of CODESA? These minutes have been hidden by Mandela and de Klerk. Anyway, look, the minutes of CODESA are available if you want them. They have not been hidden by Mandela. But the IFP left CODESA, right, refusing to negotiate. Why? They left CODESA on the basis, on their version, that there was not enough recognition given to Isilo, the king, right? They felt that this new democratic change is not going to give enough authority to Isilo Samabandla, at the time, Goodwill Zelutin, right? And they would come back only once there is agreement on the role of the king of the Zulus. Now, that is the official position that was put up. But later historians have shown that the true issue at stake was whether or not South Africa is going to be a unitary state or a federal state, in which the IFP and Mangosuthu Buthelezi were interested in federalism because that would have given them the ability to be in control of basically Zululand. Now, when he came back, and there's fascinating stories about how he came back. There's a fellow called Washington Okumu and a number of international observers who basically went to beg him. When he came back, one of the agreements that were struck was the passage of Ingonyama Trust Act, which is why it was signed on the 23rd of April, 1994, which then meant that the IFP could participate in the election. But the ballot paper had already been printed, and then there was a sticker imposed on it for IFP in order to be voted into power. That act was a radical act because it gave control over the land that was under KwaZulu government, 2.5 million hectares. It gave control to Ingonyama, Isilo, as the sole trustee over all of that land. And now, consistently, the argument is raised by other chiefs, even from Venda now they are raising this thing, but they were not there. And even from Transkei they are raising this thing, but they were not there. Where they are saying, traditionally the land belongs to the chiefs. Traditionally the land belongs to the chiefs, right? And say, customarily the land belongs to the chiefs. Let me stop here. Who agrees with that statement? That the land belongs to the chiefs in custom, in African culture? No one agrees. Oh, okay, here's a gentleman who is advocating for change, now telling us the land belongs to the chiefs. You agree with that statement?
Yeah, I was saying that in terms of customs, I'm not saying I'm advocating for them, but in terms of our customs, in terms of our traditional practices, the land belongs to the chiefs, the land belongs to the kings. That's why even in our languages, we call them, I don't know in other languages, but in Venda we call them Mav. Because
Mafu.
Yeah, Mav means soil because the land is, we believe that the land is theirs.
No, that's excellent. Because we then have two concepts. Okay, who disagrees with the idea that the land belongs to the chiefs? Oh, there's someone up there. Okay, there's no microphone. Oh, there at the corner. I don't know if you can project your voice because that seems to be very far. Yes. Yes. Okay, brilliant. So what we now get is this concept of equality coming back, right, into the debate about land, not just into the debate about succession. But the issue here is this. Customarily, does the land belong to the communities only held in custodianship by chiefs? That's the debate. Because the argument of the communities in KwaZulu-Natal is that the ownership, which is different from custodianship, the ownership of the land is communal. The chief or the traditional leader is entrusted, right, in custodianship over the land. But he doesn't own it, right? Because an owner can issue an eviction notice. Everyone else becomes a squatter, right? And then you can get an eviction notice, right? But so this is the nuance that often is missed in the conversation, is that custodianship and ownership are confused and made into one. Now, when we looked at Zulu customary law, historically, we had experts. Professor Thandabani Nhlapo was my expert, went through this. Now, I haven't done the same exercise in Venda, but I've got no doubt if I did, it would produce the same outcome. What we discovered was that the traditional system was not a system of ownership, it was a system of custodianship. Right? But that traditional system transformed into ownership under apartheid. Why? It is because what the whites wanted, they wanted control over large numbers of black communities. And the only way they could exercise that control is if they controlled the chief. But in order for the chief to have power, he had to be given the power to control the land. Because if you control the land, you control the economy. If you control the economy, you control the people. So it was what? Do you know Mamhut Mamdani? Any political science students? Mamhut Mamdani? Mamhut Mamdani called this a bifurcated state, indirect rule, right? The theory of indirect rule, where you control the people, not directly, but you control them via the chief. And you give the chief powers that he does not have customarily. So, and here is the distortion, right? The distortion has been a practice that developed under colonialism and apartheid has now been turned into custom. And it is being used in a perverse way by the chiefs in order to protect control over land when customarily they don't have that right. So if you are interested in reading about this, the book by Mamdani is Citizen and Subject, which I strongly recommend, because it looks broadly at Southern Africa as a whole, and it questions this idea of ownership of the land. So that has been this second critique. It's been a critique of Africanization, looking at values, norms, looking at succession, looking at land. We don't need the answers today, but we need to know the problems in order for us to work out the next 30 years. The last of these three critiques that I wanted to talk about has been a critique about social transformation, right? And this critique about social transformation has tended to reduce itself into land again and the control over the economy. Land and the control over the economy. Now, there's someone here who spoke about CODESA. Now, I want to ask this question about CODESA. Whether anyone thinks that without CODESA, we would have freedom today. Like, I know a lot of EFF supporters, and this CODESA was a big sellout conference. A very, very big sellout, fine. But can anyone say to me in this hall, we're now talking among friends, we're not going to say this thing outside, just among friends, does anyone think without CODESA we could have had freedom today? Like me talking here, sometimes criticizing President Ramaphosa, without a fear that I'll be arrested outside when I finish talking. So who thinks that we could have had freedom without CODESA? Okay. No one is strong enough to make that argument, that freedom was possible without CODESA. And it's true that freedom, in fact, was not possible without negotiation. There is no country that gets freedom unless it negotiates, because it needs to know the parameters of the freedom. It needs to know the terms and the conditions of freedom. It needs to know the rights. It needs to know the obligations. Most countries have to write down a constitution. You don't write a constitution in an AK-47. You sit around the table and you write a constitution. So the inevitable pathway to freedom is negotiation everywhere in the world, including in Zimbabwe. In 1979 and a bit of 1980, ZANU, ZAP, all of the political parties in Zimbabwe, they sat in London at Lancaster negotiating what freedom would look like. Now that, of course, does not mean we cannot renegotiate freedom. Right? It simply means the pathway towards freedom is always negotiation. And so the critique of CODESA per se is a misinformed critique, right? Because you could say, which is an argument I understand, you could say that we could have achieved better outcomes, right? And maybe we didn't negotiate hard enough, could have achieved better outcomes. But that argument cannot substitute negotiations per se and say, well, we can have freedom without negotiating. So it seems that whichever way you look at our path towards freedom, CODESA was an essential and a vital part of it. There was a second one, right? So CODESA was the first. The second was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. People were watching this Zondo Commission saying, no, this is a waste of money. R1 billion, where is this R1 billion gone? And then someone else, oh, well, it's gone to pay the lawyers. Okay, whatever. I don't complain about that. It didn't come to me. I got a bit of it here and there. Someone had to be paid. So the second one was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, right? Now, I also want to ask you the question. Who believes that, I mean, maybe, do we know the Truth and Reconciliation? Okay, let me ask the prior question. What was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission? What was the purpose behind it? What were they trying to do? Yes, let's hear the gentleman here. Correct the injustices of the past. Yes, okay. That's a good summary. Let's see, maybe we can get another view that's more substantive. What else? Maybe you must tell us what you mean by correcting the injustices. Maybe there's something there that you are not saying, but you are thinking.
It was mainly meant for, let's say, someone had died in the past and then tension has been brought between families and stuff. So it was to bring justice or to bring forgiveness among people. Brilliant.
Yes. Now I suspected that there's something you were thinking but not saying, and I think I was right. So the second important part of it, so the first part is what is called truth, which means it was meant to be a system of voluntary disclosure about, you call it injustices. They called it human rights violations, gross human rights violations. That took place, you say, the past, they took place between 1960 and 1993. Sorry, 1990 actually, when we started. So a fixed period of time, right? So a system of voluntary disclosure about human rights abuses, right? And they chose 1960, and many of us can disagree with 1960, but they chose 1960 because of what? What happened on the 21st of March, 1960? Huh? What happened on the 21st of March, 1960? The Sharpeville Massacre, excellent. They chose that year because it's the year of the Sharpeville Massacre. There were obviously many massacres after. There's the June 1976 massacre, 1985, 1986, Shoba, so many massacres. But that date was chosen for that, but to mark the significance of the Sharpeville Massacre, right? So first part of the TRC was these revelations, because everyone accepted that we cannot move forward until we know what happened, right? I think many of you have got stories of uncles, of grandfathers, of grandmothers, of aunts who disappeared, disappeared. No one knows what happened to them. They just disappeared, they vanished. Many of us know the story of Steve Biko, right? Steve Biko, who violates his banning order. This is a story that's happening in September 1977. He's banned. He's a banned person. He must stay in the locality that is defined by his banning order. One day he decides, I've had enough of it. He bans it. He violates it. He then gets arrested. He then gets interrogated, And in the course of the interrogation, he gets severely beaten up by a white soldier, a white policeman. They beat him up so badly. And thereafter, they put him in the back of a bakkie, and they strip him naked, push him in the back of a bakkie, and then they handcuff him. They put cuffs on his legs and then handcuff him. But he's naked, and he's been beaten up, he's bleeding. And then they drive for 11 hours from Port Elizabeth to Pretoria. And of course, he dies. He dies. 11th of September, 1977, he dies. And then when it goes to the inquest, they say that no, he must have died from hitting his head against the wall, right? And the magistrate agrees. They say, no, there's no one to blame for the death of Steve Biko. And that becomes the official narrative. No one knows what killed Steve Biko. And the Minister of Justice, who's speaking in Parliament, has to explain, because it is a huge scandal. And then he says, well, we have so much freedoms in South Africa, including the freedom to kill yourself if you want. Right? And then he says, I don't know what happened to Steve Biko, but it leaves me cold. Right? Now, that became the official narrative about the death in detention of Steve Biko. The only way we got to know the full truth, that actually he had been tortured, he had been put naked in the back of a buggy, he had been handcuffed, and he had been driven from Port Elizabeth to Pretoria. The only way we got to know the full story of Biko's death in detention was because we had the Truth Commission, right? The Truth Commission, where these events had to be told. But we did not get it from them. They were still hiding the truth. They were still hiding the truth, right? We got it from many other witnesses and from many other sources of information that were available, that actually Steve Biko's last days were horrific for any individual. The same with the Matthew Goniwe, Sparo Mkhonto, Sicelo Mhlawuli, the Craddock Four. Same thing with them. This story is happening in June of 1985, right, where someone has been taping their conversations, and they are organizing to go to a meeting of the United Democratic Front, the UDF. And then they are followed on the way by the apartheid security policemen, who then apprehend them, beat them up, kill them, shoot them, and then burn their bodies. You see. And then they thereafter remove and replace the registration number of the car that they had been driving. Right? And then they spread this rumor through Stratcom. Spread the rumor through Stratcom, which is then brought out in the newspapers, which is, well, they must have been killed by Azapo in what is called black-on-black violence, right? And then to sow confusion within the black communities. We had no way of knowing what happened to the Craddock Four. We also had no way of knowing what happened to the Pepco 3. So many people, the COSAS 5, it goes on and on and on and on. So many people that died in detention, that disappeared into exile, that were murdered, that were tortured, we had no way. We needed the Truth Commission to tell us the full horror, you see, the full horror of apartheid, right? Now, why was this important that we know the story? We needed to know the story so that we can appreciate freedom, right? So we can guard against any attempts to take freedom away from us. You remember Bishop Tutu, who was I know a lot of young people these days, they criticize this Bishop Tutu. They say, hey, this Tutu, yes, he was selling out. Remember Bishop Tutu saying the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. See, when you are free and you know what you are free from, you are eternally vigilant in making sure that you don't lose this freedom. Obviously, in 1978, I was hardly, not even a toddler, So many of us were not there. But we know of what happened because of the stories of the Truth Commission. Right? But the second idea to the Truth Commission, and that was your point, was forgiveness. Right? The idea was that we will not be able to forgive unless we know what happened, which is why the TRC also had an amnesty system. So if you go to the TRC, right, and you make a disclosure, but the disclosure is false, or you make a disclosure, but the disclosure is incomplete, or you don't even go to the TRC, the idea was that you will not get any amnesty, right? Which means that you will be prosecuted, because murder is murder, even if it is committed in a political context, because the killing of a human being with the intention to kill them is murder, and therefore it is a common law crime. It can always be prosecuted, and there is no limitations when it comes to the time period for prosecuting murder. If you murdered someone, you've murdered someone, therefore you should be prosecuted. So the question was then, we need an amnesty system for those people that can tell us the full truth of the horror of apartheid. Many people went to the TRC. So if those of you who want something to do this afternoon, go to Google and put TRC. Just look at those stories. It will give you the sense of what happened. Many people went to the TRC. They told their stories. But many didn't. Many didn't. And particularly the people at the higher level, the army generals, the members of cabinet, the political bosses, they did not go, which meant that they should have been prosecuted. Right? They should have been prosecuted. Someone should have taken an indictment, drawn it up, put it there. I hereby charge you with the murder of Steve Biko. Hereby charge you with the murder of Matthew Skoniwe. But that didn't happen either. Didn't happen either. What we now know from later revelations, particularly from people like Advocate Vusi Pikoli, who was the National Director of Public Prosecution, was that there was intense political interference to prevent the NPA from charging the criminals who acted under the guise of political instructions. So our own government, right, our own government of freedom, according to Advocate Vusi Pikoli, interfered with the prosecution of the apartheid killers. And that is why we know something, but not the full truth. And that is why the amnesty process was undermined, because it meant that people who did not get amnesty and should have been prosecuted were not prosecuted, right? So when we talk about what is holding the country from moving forward, psychologically, emotionally, partly it is the trauma of the unfinished business of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I have seen recently that Advocate Shamila Batohi has set up a special unit to prioritize the TRC cases. But I am not satisfied until the first criminal accused is put on the dock. But the other critique of the TRC was its exclusion from its terms of reference of land, right? Land was not part and parcel of what the TRC had to investigate. Some people argue that it should have been, right? We should have asked the TRC to consider the dispossession of land also as a gross violation of human rights. And we should have asked the people that are in control of the land today to also come to the TRC and to also account for the violent dispossession, because most dispossession of land was violent. But this was excluded from the terms of reference of the TRC. What this has meant is that as far as land is concerned, we've had to do this ourselves outside of the project, of the large project of transition, to do this ourselves. So we have had to work on restitution, which is this idea that you can get back the land if you can prove that you were dispossessed from the 19th of June, 1913. Even that is itself problematic. Why should the cutoff be 1913? Why should it not be 1652 when Jan van Riebeeck arrived? Why should it not be 1820? Why should it not be 1807? So many dates that you can think about which are significant in our history. But 1913 is chosen because it's the coming into effect of the Natives Land Act. But as I have pointed out in my recent book, the 1913 Native Land Act itself cemented in legal form what had been lost in war, because it came late after the wars of dispossession had been completed. So restitution, therefore, has been an incomplete process in social transformation, in the same way as the TRC was, which meant that we've had to look at a different policy of redistribution. And this policy of redistribution was itself debated. Again, I like going to the archives of the transition, debated during the transition. How are we going to give black people land? Whether it is for living or whether it is for eating from it, but they need to be given land. Redistribution emerged as a preferred method. And how would it work? It would work simply on the basis of need. So those who need land but cannot afford it would get it. But redistribution was simply never implemented. Instead, restitution became the focal point of land reform. So which means in the next 30 years, so those of us in this room have to focus on redistribution of land. We have not even passed the first statute on redistribution. Not passed the first statute. For 30 years, we had the right to pass the statute, we never passed it. So it will be passed by us, and that is what we must be agitating for. It's a system of land redistribution. Finally, I want to make some reflections then on social transformation by looking at the economy. We know two features of the post-apartheid economy that have remained with us. The first has been the control of the economy by whites, which is control that they derived from apartheid and colonialism. And not only has that been entrenched, it's been expanded. So if you read a book by Domini, an Afrikaner historian, he makes the one argument that under apartheid, there were not the number of Afrikaner millionaires and billionaires that we have seen post-democracy, right? So democracy has been good for white millionaires and white billionaires. The numbers have grown, and the standard of living of the white community has generally gone up. So it's been a project that has benefited from an economic point of view. It's not been neutral, it's been hugely beneficial. So the opening up of the economy, the liberalization of the economy, the changing of the stock exchange rules, and the opening up of the economy to international investors. That transformative project has not been neutral. It's in fact expanded white wealth. In fact, 3, 4, maybe quadrupled white wealth. And these are the statistics. Now for black people, most important research is done by Sampete Blanche. But what democracy has meant from an economic perspective for black people, he makes two conclusions. One has been the growth of a large segment of a middle class. So that has been enabled by the social mobility policies. And there are two primary policies there that have been strong. One has been the black economic empowerment policy. The second has been the employment equity policy. And that has opened up and created a large black middle class The salaries are higher, the jobs are available if you are educated and if you are within that very, very mobile black middle class. And that would not have been possible without the socio-economic transformation of the last 30 years. Because under apartheid, we were operating in a constrained economy. It didn't matter whether you had a PhD, or you had a degree in chemistry, or you had a degree in physics. If you were black, you were consigned to one section of society. But the opening up of the economy as a result of democracy has enabled those of us with skills to live out our wildest dreams. And that has been good to sustain the democratic project. So, in other words, without black economic empowerment and without employment equity policies, it is difficult to see how the new South Africa could in fact have been constructed. This is the argument Professor Tembeka makes. He's an economic historian from Stellenbosch University. But he also says, what democratization has also produced, which was not as visible under apartheid, is a huge underclass. And that underclass is primarily African. So those are the people living below the poverty line. So what we've had is that we've had people that are poorer than they were in the years of apartheid, right? So which means the singular feature from an economic perspective has been racialized inequality. In 2018, the World Bank published its study about poverty and inequality. And it found that South Africa, on a Gini coefficient matrix of testing inequality, is in fact the most unequal society in the world, more unequal than Brazil, more unequal than India. Right? So which means that the challenge we have as we sit here today, the challenge we have in entrenching democratization is inequality. Right? It's inequality. It's the democratization of the economy. Right? It's the democratization of the economy. Now, debating that question about the democratization of the economy and the spread of economic benefits and the enablement of economic ingenuity from those who are talented should not exclude the consolidation of the victories that we have achieved that Professor Tembeka talks about, which is the policy of black economic empowerment and the policy of employment equity. Now, of course, black economic empowerment has proven in many instances to have produced unintended consequences. But as he points out, it has produced very, very rich black people. The question for us is whether we think it is a good idea to have very rich black people or whether we think wealthy people should only be white, right? Or whether we think actually what we have as a greatest challenge facing the democratization project is inequality. I want to leave you here with those three challenges about constitutionalism: representation, Africanization, social transformation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Advocate Ngcukaitobi. That was quite a lecture. I think you touched on everything. Everyone had a share, from constitutionalism, socio-economic transformation, everything, land issues. Thank you so much. We really benefited a lot. And I'm sure our students, since the director and the EDs, okay, the other one has just stepped out, I don't think this time there will be a need for a special exam or supplementary exam because we have just done a huge revision class and, packed with so much more than what we did in class. Can you please clap hands again for him? Thanks again, Advocate. We're now going to go to questions, reflections, and comments. I'm sure after such an address, you are having so many things in your mind. You want to share, you want to ask, you want to, so many things. We are going to, and we need to be quick. I mean, you heard how difficult it was to secure him to come here. So if you don't ask your question quickly, I know he has to leave earlier. He may go without before you answer, he answers your question. So please, I'm going to take 4 hands and then he answers and then we go to the second round and then we'll see if we can still go on. I think we have 2 roving mics. There's one question there at the back. Another one here. Okay, maybe you can start since you already have a mic.
Just pick the first one.
Yeah.
So my question is, as an advocate for human rights and social justice, how do you think we can effectively address the growing concerns around state capture, corruption, and the erosion of state-owned enterprises?
Thank you. The lady there.
Thank you. My name is Ralia Vekwa Onsikao, and I'm doing my final year studying LLB. My question is with regards to the TRC. You mentioned that there are a lot of political leaders who didn't come forth to tell the people the crimes that they've committed. So the question is there a platform where those people will ever be brought to justice? And where do we begin? Because most of us here, youth, like myself, I did that part of TRC back in high school, but it was brief and it didn't go into detail. We don't really know much of what really happened. So where do we begin? Most of those people are all probably have dementia and whatnot, and they're dying. Will they ever be brought to justice? Thank you.
Thank you. Is there another question? There's a hand there. Can you please just stand so that the mic can see and locate you quickly, please? Okay, yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Ndiwo Kangare. I'm a second-year LLB student. And my question is, what is the advocate's stance on the recent call for Western Cape independence and the people that base it off of self-determination?
Okay, it seems you got that. You got it. Okay, the last question for this round.
Greetings. My name is Swenimwape. I have a question regarding the negotiation, including the CODESA, which had complications, which some of the whites did not like. There were massacres, including the assassination of Krisani, chief of Mkoto Wesizwe, not forgetting the negotiations that derived from the speech of de Klerk in February. According to you, would it be possible to obtain freedom without negotiation? And if we did not, would we be this far or not regarding freedom? And another one is the negotiation also allowed traditional leaders to go on. That's the reason why most of the chiefs are men, not women. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you, Advocate Ngcukaitobi.
Yeah, thank you. It's fascinating because I was thinking about this lecture, like, okay, how do I do it? So anyway, eventually, always like, okay, let me just type this thing up because I don't want to lose my thought and whatever. But then let me also try and make it interactive, So I think insofar as making it interactive, I've probably overachieved Because now we're having a debate about rebuilding society together, which is what we need. You know, people have forgotten this thing. So I researched the ANC. So I don't just talk about the ANC. So I researched them. Historically, whatever, who was there, how old were they, where did they come from, etc., etc. Then I found that, all right, then I found that, okay, no. Actually, these people were founders, were actually young people, 28 years, 32 years, 31 years. So founders, Seme, Mangena, Msimang, all of them, they're very, very, very young people. So which means that the future of South Africa actually is here in this room of the next 30 years. Right? It's the future of South Africa in the next 30 years. Now, these 4 questions are all questions about this future. In other words, what kind of a society are we trying to create, for ourselves, not for our parents, but for ourselves? What kind of society are we trying to create? So that's why Kopano's question about state capture, is important. In other words, but you see, well, what is the way of effectively addressing state capture? So on the narrow question of state capture, we've got a full report. This commission went on for 4 years. We've got a full report. It makes specific recommendations about who must be prosecuted, there must be restitution of money, etc., etc. It seems that the first starting point is the implementation of the Zondo Commission report, the full implementation of the Zondo Commission reports. You can't say, I'm implementing those recommendations that I like, but those that are directed at me, I don't know, Sawubona, we'll see. So it's a full implementation about the Zondo Commission reports. And the reason why this is crucial is also a question of accountability. It's accountability. You can't appoint a commission and pay the commission R1 billion only for the commission recommendations not to be implemented. So it's accountability for state funds that have been used to construct this commission. And it was a necessary commission because we got to see ourselves in the mirror. We got to see that we are a chronically corrupt society because of the exposures that were happening through that. So that commission was reflective of us, not us individually, but reflective of us in the abstract sense that it's a reflection of society. We saw it, but we need implementation. So the demand, therefore, should be a demand for the full implementation of the Zondo Commission reports, not partial implementation. Especially because the government has announced publicly that it accepts the outcomes of the Zondo Commission reports. Number 2, the TRC. What are we going to do? And again, that's a future-looking question. What are we going to do about the people that did not go to the TRC? Some of them have died, others are suffering from dementia. But yes, those who are dead, there's nothing we can do about them. And maybe those who are suffering from dementia, I think they must go and say to the judge that they're suffering from dementia. The point is that they must be prosecuted. The deal was simple. Go to the TRC, make a disclosure, you'll get amnesty. If you don't go, or if you go and not make a disclosure, or if you go and make a false disclosure, you will be prosecuted. So it comes back to the first point. You see, we are not going to take this country forward until we have accountability. The reason we had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was to decide what restitution will be given to victims and what prosecution will follow the perpetrators. Both of those, restitution to victims and punishment for perpetrators, have not been done. And that's 30 years later. So the demand here is that those who are still prosecutable, because they are available, should be prosecuted. Now, in September this year, the inquest of the Craddock 4 will take place in Eastern Cape. I'm in the case representing one of the families. Hopefully, after that inquest, we can identify those people that are still alive that can be prosecuted. But there is no substitute to prosecution. You have to prosecute the people that did not get amnesty. The second part about the TRC was restitution to victims. we still have many, many victims of human rights violations that are still asking for restitution. Again, there is no substitute. That restitution must be given. Many other societies that have suffered colonialism and apartheid in the same way that South Africa did, they began their journey to freedom with reparations. We did not have reparations in South Africa. You have to debate yourselves whether after 30 years we should be demanding reparations. In America, the debate for reparations for slavery has gained ground. It's a strong debate. And I'm saying, even with us here in South Africa, it is possible to say, well, we can't actually move forward until we've settled the issue of reparations. And that's not looking at the past, but that's looking at the reality that it is impossible for black people to achieve a state of equilibrium on the economic front until the historical injustices have been resolved. Then, independence of the Western Cape. Look, I reject the notion of independence for the Western Cape. The discussion is a fundamentally racist discussion. Unfortunately, what has happened is that a right-wing group in the Western Cape has managed to ensconce itself with some colored communities and some colored political parties to distort the history of South Africa and to create the myth of fascism. I don't know if you've ever heard of this term, fascism, where we are all in this Olympics of who came to South Africa first. And what they have been able to do has been to distort the history by saying the colored people in the Western Cape were the first and indigenous and the true owners of South Africa. And everybody else arrived in South Africa late, sometimes coinciding with the arrival of whites, sometimes coming even after the whites had arrived. Now that is an old project. If you look at the records in that period when the new South Africa was being created, 1910, there was a deliberate strategy to de-Africanize colored people from the Western Cape, even to introduce this label of colored to describe the Khoi was a strategy of de-Africanization. It was to make them un-African. And that project was enhanced and multiplied under apartheid, where they created that separation on the voters' roll, and they created a job preference system in which whites were at the top, and then coloreds came, but Africans were always at the bottom. It's been an old project of de-Africanization. So the challenge for us is to show the broader conception that actually the colored people in the Western Cape are as African as we are. And it is false as a matter of history that there is a fascism movement. Now, it's this fascism movement that has been, together with white racists, driving Western Cape independence. But what is at the heart of it is racism, pure and simple. So it is something to be rejected as regressive. But it also is unrealistic. It is unrealistic because cutting off the Western Cape, I don't understand how it works, because if you look at South Africa, it's like a human being. You know, the Western Cape plays a particular role. It's like saying, well, I'm gonna cut my left hand, you know, then I won't have my left hand. But then you are no longer a complete person. So the Western Cape is important to South Africa because it contributes something to South Africa, but it also takes a lot of things from South Africa. It's mutually dependent. So to say I'm just going to take the Western Cape out of South Africa is also just an unrealistic proposition. So it's fraught with a historical distortion, but it's also fraught with a lot of unrealism, which comes back to showing how unthinking those who actually thought of this idea were. Now let me talk about Chris Hani, freedom without negotiations, traditional leaders. Yes, my view is that it's impossible to think about freedom without negotiations, and that any idea to somehow criticize CODESA in principle is a misguided argument. I am not saying it's misguided politically because it could appeal emotionally, but as a matter of pure logic, the argument doesn't make any sense because they cannot show us any other country that achieved freedom without negotiations, because you have to decide what are the terms of the freedom and what are the terms of this post-apartheid settlement. Everywhere else in the world, that is how it has. It happened like that in Zimbabwe, happened like that in Namibia, it happened like that in South Africa. That does not mean we, as the current generation, are stuck to the bargain of our forefathers. We have to design a new bargain for ourselves. You see, no one is going to do this. We have to imagine freedom, not the freedom of Mandela. We have to accept that Mandela has done his job and he has exited the stage. The responsibility is ours to imagine our own freedom. Because let me tell you this, and you may not realize this. In the next 30 years, so if you are 18 now, how old will you be? 48. So people will be asking you, what did you do? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Advocate. I'm looking at our time. We can no longer take any more questions. But I see, like his address was very engaging. And also now in answering these questions, he was very broad. So I think a lot of things have been covered up. But, you know, maybe that will make him to come again next year. Thank you so much. For me, I think what I will hold until you come back is, you said equality is not something we inherit, but it is something we fight or inspire to attain. And that has really stuck with me. I'll hold on that until you come back. Thank you. We're now going to, I'm going to call upon the ED, and the EDs, the other one has stepped out, the one who is here, then the Director of the School of Law, and also Mr. Andisani to come to the fore, and also our esteemed guests, please, we're asking you to come back. Thank you so much for the wonderful music. We're now going to ask the Director of the School of Law, Prof. Ndlovu, to come and give us a vote of thanks. And then after him, I will ask for Mr. Makanya to come and give the announcement on item 7. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I hope everyone enjoyed the lecture. We really appreciate hosting Advocate Ngcukaitobi here. And my task is very simple. And then in case someone doesn't know who I am, I'm Lonius Ndlovu. I sing for my supper in the next building, the School of Law there. That is where I ply my trade. As the acting director. Let me just very quickly, because I don't want to detain you for that long here, really go through the task that has been allocated to me. First of all, to thank the program director, Ms. Crystal Mokwena for ably handling the program, and of course our Dr. Manto Madiba for introducing our guest. I hope, Advocate, when you come back next time, Manto would have come to terms with Ngcukaitobi. And then let me thank the organizers of this event, our Division of Marketing and Communication, Student Affairs, the SRC, for putting this together. I know, I mean, as the School of Law, naturally, colleagues would have expected that we be the ones that actually ran with this and secured the services of the advocate here, but we're beaten at it by our colleagues. They actually work better than us. We thank you for that. And then, of course, I want to thank the students who are here, specifically the law students, the students from other faculties, although I'm worried we don't have many, but I see a colleague from the Faculty of Humanities, Social Sciences, and Education, a staff member. I've interacted with him on other occasions, but I'm sure there could be some students here from other faculties. And then I also want to say, looking at members of the Univen staff, starting off with Executive Dean Professor Bantwini, and your counterpart, my boss, who has stepped out, Professor Kanyane, and the rest of the colleagues who graced this occasion, colleagues from my school, sitting at on this table, and then the other one, I will not go through the names, and then colleagues sitting amongst the audience who joined us midway or earlier in the proceedings. Your presence is also noted. I also saw the head of the Department of Criminal Justice here, but he may have stepped out, but we appreciate your coming. And then, of course, I'd want to lastly zero in on our guest speaker, Senior Counsel, and say your record speaks for itself. As I was sitting here, I was just wondering how your brain is wired. When one looks at the amount of information you have in there, the events, the legal history, economics, political science, constitutional law, and then very specifically the dates. I was sitting there and I was actually checking some of the dates just to make sure the advocate is not making anything up. And I was disappointed, yeah, quite a sharp memory. And I'm sure, looking at the background, which Mantra read out for us, and some of the issues, about your background, your education that you shared with us, our students would surely identify with that kind of background. Students, here is one of your own, right? Someone who went through similar circumstances to yours. So it is not all, the future is bright, irrespective of where you acquire your education. And then I'm sure, as the program director had indicated, really you actually brought in an approach that I appreciated in terms of delivery. And we have public lectures from time to time. We normally have the speaker here, speaking, and with no interaction with the audience. But as I sat there, I was saying, look, as a law teacher, I'm actually looking at it, Prof. Bantwini, the pedagogy part, how it was delivered. I really appreciated that, which is why, Advocate Ngcukaitobi, when you get back, when you come back from your trip to Dubai, you will find an email in your inbox inviting you to join us as a professor of the practice. But we really appreciate that the cerebral delivery, it's more than what most of our professors deliver to our students in an average lecture room. And I think the average student here who knows this right from left would really appreciate having a professor of your caliber, before them. And then I just want you obviously introduced us to the concept of freedom, and I'm very happy, or rather thrilled by the fact that you actually took us through parliamentary versus constitutional supremacy, And for us being in an election season, I don't know how many of you have been combing through manifestos of different parties like I've been doing. And the advocate, maybe deliberately, I'm not sure, or omitted to tell us about a certain political party which has remained nameless, which registered, I think, I'm copying from you also on the dates, I will not have a date by month, which registered somewhere in July last year and uses green as its color. Is in its manifesto, it actually says we must go back to parliamentary supremacy. And additionally, maybe our students here should really be worried. The very same party says we must jettison the Constitution, throw it away completely, not have it, because it is not delivering. But then very disturbingly, I know I was going through the manifesto and thinking, look, this is most of these things are negative. And then I came across something that rang quite close home. It is the only political party's manifesto I've gone through where there is an explicit reference to improving the legal profession. And you know, you can say negative things and then maybe there's a small positivity in there. And that's the only thing I picked out. But we thank you, Advocate Ngcukaitobi, and we appreciate everyone for the roles that you played. And we wish you a safe trip back to Johannesburg and all the best in everything that we do. Of course, you are going to leave us here, but from time to time, when we want to see you, the TV is always there to take care of that. Thank you.
No, thank you very much for the opportunity given. I'm not here to say much. I'm just here to do announcement. And also you'll forgive us for the program or for the part that we've missed as the SRC. We were called here to give a message of support. MC, sorry, we just arrived late. But maybe if we can just ask for 2 minutes of your time, we can just deliver it as fast as we can. Okay, thank you very much. I would like to thank the president of the Advocate Ngcukaitobi, who has honored the invite to this public lecture which is taking place today. I'm just here to give an announcement. We were told that immediately when we leave here, there will be something that is prepared just here at the passage, but we must remain seated just like we are. There is a director who will be standing there who will be showing us how we are going to do it, but we are pleading with you to remain calm the way you are. Food will be reserved. Thank you.
Recibisenge mapara, riseki menyana le mapara, recibisenge bachelete, riseki menyana bachelete, baritize nyana le nyana champagne. Babete kashazene, babete.